The bounty hunters gathered in the neon-lit halls of Zirek's Den, a lawless station orbiting the wreckage of a forgotten war. Smoke curled from a dozen alien cigars, the air thick with the scent of fuel, sweat, and the ever-present hum of danger. The Galactic Bounty Guild only accepted killers, mercenaries, and war-forged hunters, those who had already carved their names into the bones of the cosmos. And yet, tonight, the gathered killers weren't whispering about some notorious warlord or elusive fugitive. They were laughing at him. He sat at the center of the room, human in every visible way, unarmored, unimposing, and wholly out of place among the scaled, chitinous, and bio-augmented horrors that called themselves bounty hunters. His hands rested on the table, fingers idly tracing patterns in the condensation of his untouched drink. A four-armed Zerthak brute slapped a scaled hand against the table, his mandibles clicking in delight. A human, a soft-blooded dirt-born. Human thinks he can join us? More laughter. Some jeered openly, flashing fangs and sharpened claws. Others simply shook their heads, chuckling darkly. The Bounty Guild was no place for weaklings. One hunter leaned forward, metal implants glinting under the dim lights. "What's your name, little primate?" "Need it for the rejection logs." He finally looked up, the faintest of smiles flickering at the corner of his mouth. Not forced, not nervous, just patient. "Name's Carter," he said, "but I won't be in your rejection logs. I'll be in your nightmares." The laughter stuttered. Something about the way he said it, calm, unaffected, sent a ripple through the crowd. The mood shifted, confusion creeping in where amusement had once stood. A sleek, predatory Zelari war killer, all black carapace and razored limbs, studied him with narrow, calculating eyes. "Brave words," it hissed, voice like a knife scraping glass. "But words won't get you a contract. The guild doesn't accept talk. It accepts results." Carter pushed his drink aside. "Then give me a contract," he said. "I'll set the price." A silence heavier than a dead star settled over the room. The hunters, killers who had built their reputations through war, slaughter, and blood, stared at him, waiting for the inevitable flinch, the telltale flicker of doubt. It never came. The Zelari war killer's mandibles spread wide in what passed. "You for a grin." It flicked a talon, summoning a holographic contract into the air. The job was a death sentence, a rogue Tarkhan warlord entrenched in a fortress of molten rock, surrounded by legions of cybernetic zealots. A job no sane bounty hunter had touched in months. "The bounty is set at 100,000 galactic credits," the Zelari sneered. "You take this job, you die. But if you somehow live, you'll earn your place." Carter leaned forward, scanning the contract with unreadable eyes. Then, with deliberate, practiced ease, he tapped the interface. The bounty changed. 1,000,000 credits. A collective hush fell over the hunters. Even the Zelari's grin faltered. Carter stood, stretching like a man who had just agreed to a simple chore. "I told you," he said, rolling his shoulders. "I set the price." And then he walked out. Behind him, the silence broke into chaos. The human had just rewritten the rules of the guild, and no one knew whether to laugh or start running. Carter walked through Zirek's den without looking back. The laughter was gone. The whispers had begun. A human had just set his own price. Even the walls of the station seemed to hum with the weight of it. Rumors would spread. Names would be whispered across encrypted channels. And in dark corners of the underworld, killers and mercenaries would mutter the impossible. The fool raised the bounty on himself. Carter didn't care. The bounty wasn't the risk. The bounty was the message. He entered a narrow corridor leading toward the docking bay. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of oil and ozone. Zirek's Den was a relic of an older war, a station stitched together from scavenged hulls and forgotten wreckage. Everything here had history, blood rusted into the bulkheads, shadows that never truly left. It was a fitting place to start. His ship, Eidolon, waited in Bay 12, a matte black, asymmetrical vessel with battle scars along its hull. Not sleek, not beautiful, but alive. It had gotten him through worse. As the pressure seal hissed open, Carter didn't have to turn to know someone had followed him. The footfalls were too light for a brute, too deliberate for a thug. "You're either here to kill me or talk me out of it," he said without turning. A voice, a low, synthetic hum laced with amusement, answered from the shadows. Would it make a difference? Carter exhaled through his nose. No. From the darkness of the hangar, Revik stepped into the dim blue light. Tall, wrapped in a long, ragged coat that concealed a dozen cybernetic enhancements. His right eye glowed faintly, a predator's iris scanning Carter's vitals with lazy efficiency. "You put a 1,000,000 credit price on a Tarkhan warlord," Revik said, his voice like sandpaper over metal. "You know what that means, don't you?" Carter leaned against his ship's frame, arms crossed. "Means no one's going to touch the job. Means I get him to myself." Revik studied him for a long moment, then a sharp breath, something between amusement and disbelief. "You're insane." Carter shrugged. "Probably." A static flicker crossed Revik's mechanical eye, a deeper scan, digging for answers. "You're not enhanced. No cybernetics, no biomods, no exoframes. What the hell makes you think you can take down a Tarkhan?" "Warlord?" Carter's expression didn't change. "Because I'm human," Revik snorted. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." A pause, a longer one than before, and that was when Carter knew he had already won. Revik wasn't laughing. The bounty hunter glanced at the ship, then at the contract still flickering on his wrist display. "You're serious." Carter stepped into the ship's open ramp, throwing one last look over his shoulder. Serious enough to cash out? The airlock sealed behind him. Outside, Revik stared at the closed hatch for a long time. Then, slowly, he muttered under his breath, "Maybe they should have let him in the guild after all." The cockpit of Eidolon was dark, except for the dim glow of shifting data streams. The ship ran silent, drifting through the void like a shadow between stars. Carter sat in the pilot's chair, fingers tapping idly on the armrest as he studied the contract details hovering in front of him. The bounty had already begun to ripple. Through the underworld, encrypted messages bouncing between merc networks, data brokers trying to make sense of the insane price tag attached to the job. But the job itself? No one had touched it for a reason. Tarkhan Warlord, Razek Vul. A name, etched in blood across half a dozen war fronts. Tarkhan warlords weren't just killers. They were siege engines wrapped in flesh, augmented monstrosities built for planetary invasions, towering brutes with bone-forged armor and minds sharpened by centuries of war. And this one, he'd made himself a god. Vul ruled from Draga's Maw, a planet barely worth the dirt it floated on. A dead world, cracked open by tectonic warfare, its surface lined with smoldering scars. It wasn't just a fortress, it was a graveyard, the kind where no one left. Footprints. Carter exhaled slowly, scanning the details. The zealots protecting Vul were fanatics, post-organic warriors fused into their armor. No pain, no fear. Just bodies made of metal, flesh, and religious fury. A standard bounty hunter wouldn't even get past the outer defenses. Good thing he wasn't one of them. A notification pulsed against the screen, an incoming transmission. Carter flicked a switch, letting the scrambled audio crackle through the speakers. At first just static, then a voice. "Turn back." Carter's brow furrowed. He leaned forward. More distortion. Then, "The Maw is awake. The storm is watching." A pause. Then the signal cut. Silence settled in the cockpit. Carter flexed his fingers against the controls, rolling his shoulders. The warning was meaningless. Cryptic messages, ghost signals. Par for the course. He had a warlord to kill. Eidolons. Thrusters burned to life, breaking orbit. The void stretched before him, endless and cold. The hunt had begun. The descent into Drauga's Maw was anything but quiet. Carter's hands gripped the controls as Eidolon sliced through the upper atmosphere, its hull shuddering under the planet's gravitational pull. Red storms churned below, violent gales twisting, like the tortured remains of a dead world's last breath. The surface was a fractured wasteland, black rocks split apart by tectonic fire. Massive craters pocked the landscape, some natural, others the result of orbital bombardment from wars long forgotten. Drauga's Maw had never known peace. A warning flickered across the display. Lock-on detected. Carter barely had time to react before the sky came alive with fire. He yanked the controls, sending Eidolon into a vicious barrel roll, just as two missile streaks tore through the space he'd occupied a second ago. The explosions lit up the storm-racked sky, shaking the cockpit with violent turbulence. "All right," Carter muttered. "Guess the welcoming committee's here." The ship's scanners lit up, 3 aerial interceptors, Tarkhan warcraft modified, with cybernetic augments already adjusting their trajectory for another pass. No communication, no warnings, just death. Carter didn't bother reaching for the comms. This wasn't a negotiation. A burst of plasma fire screamed past the hull, sizzling against the heat shielding. Carter slammed the thrusters, diving low into the storm, using the thick red haze as cover. The interceptors followed, their targeting. Systems relentless, but Eidolon had one advantage. It wasn't a warship, it was a ghost. Carter cut the engines. A dead stop. For a split second, Eidolon hung in the storm, motionless. The interceptors overshot, their targeting systems struggling to adjust. That was all the time he needed. Carter flipped the ship's secondary thrusters in reverse. Eidolon shot backward at an impossible angle, sliding behind the closest interceptor. Before its pilot could react, then he fired, a single railgun round, precise, brutal, final. The enemy ship detonated instantly, breaking apart like brittle glass. The remaining 2 split off, repositioning. Smart. They wouldn't fall for the same. Tricked twice. Carter's lips twitched. That's fine. He had others. He pushed Eidolon into a sharp descent, hugging the jagged terrain below. The interceptors followed, weaving through the canyons, their plasma cannons lighting up the dark. They had speed. He had instinct. A deep chasm loomed ahead, narrow, twisting, nearly impassable. A death trap for anyone who didn't know how to navigate it. Carter accelerated. The interceptors followed. He waited, waited. Then, at the last second, he cut power again. Eidolon dropped like a stone, skimming the rocky surface. The first interceptor. You couldn't correct in time. Its wing clipped the canyon wall, sending it into a violent death spiral before slamming into the rock with a fireball that lit up the storm. One left. Carter gunned the thrusters, twisting the ship upward, breaking free of the canyon. The last interceptor tried to match him, but Eidolon had already flipped around, guns primed. One shot. The final enemy ship erupted in flames. Silence returned. Only the howling storm remained. Carter exhaled, flexing his fingers. That had been fun, but the real challenge was still ahead. He angled Eidolon toward the horizon, where the blackened fortress of Razek Vul rose against the crimson sky. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. The fortress loomed ahead, a jagged monolith of obsidian and steel perched atop a broken plateau, its spires clawing at the storm-choked sky. Lightning arced in the distance, illuminating the fortified walls lined with sentries, zealots, their bodies fused to their armor, motionless as statues. Carter adjusted his breather mask, feeling the thin oxygen press against his skin. The wind screamed around him, carrying the acrid scent of scorched rock and metal. No alarms had been raised. The beauty of a one-man infiltration, no wasted movement, no sloppy squads giving away position. Eidolon had landed a mile out, tucked into the shadow of a crumbling ravine. Getting this close had been a game of patience and silence. Now he was at the gates. Carter's fingers tightened around the grav hook launcher strapped to his forearm. One shot, one perfect arc. He fired. The hook latched onto the fortress wall, magnetizing instantly. Carter took a breath, then yanked himself skyward. The wind whipped past him, his silhouette vanishing into the black stone as he climbed. A sentry moved, an unnatural jerk of metal and sinew. Its visor swept the area below, sensors scanning for heat signatures. Carter clung to the wall, silent. Still, the sentry's gaze hovered, paused, then just as suddenly it turned away. Not human, not worth noticing. Carter smirked. Perfect. With a final pull, he reached the upper ledge, slipping onto the battlements. The zealots patrolled in precise, unthinking patterns, programmed warriors, engineered to obey without question. But they weren't his problem. Not yet. The warlord was inside. The air inside was thick, hot with the scent of molten metal and burned ozone. The chamber was vast, lined with banners of ancient wars, the walls carved with the history of conquered civilizations. At the center, atop a throne of welded steel and bone, sat Razek Vul. The Tarkhan warlord was a mountain of muscle and armor, his 4 crimson eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying his domain. Heavy augments lined his arms, grafted plating covering what had once been organic flesh. His massive hands gripped the arms of the throne, each finger ending in a serrated claw. "You." The voice was gravel, a low tremor that shook the air. Carter stepped forward, calm, deliberate. The zealots flanking the throne twitched, their weapons shifting, ready but waiting. The warlord tilted his head. "You came alone." Carter shrugged. Didn't seem fair otherwise. Silence. Then a slow, grinding chuckle, amusing. Razek's lips curled over jagged teeth. "The guild should have sent an army." "They did," Carter said. "It's just me." The chuckle stopped. The warlord leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And yet you live." "Maybe I was just faster." Razek's grin widened. "You think speed will save you here, human?" Carter exhaled. Time to move. The throne room exploded into chaos. Carter ducked, a plasma spear carved through the space where his head had been. He twisted, drawing his sidearm and snapping 2 shots into the first zealot. The armor cracked, not enough to kill, but enough to stagger. A massive clawed hand came for him. Carter spun. The warlord was already moving, too fast for something that size. A freight train with reflexes. Carter rolled under the strike, came up firing. 3 rounds, center mass. The impact barely made Razek flinch. The armor absorbed it like a stone in the ocean. All right then. Carter pivoted, dodging another zealot's blade and driving a knife into its neck seam. The body convulsed, metal and flesh sparking as it dropped. Razek was already closing the distance. No wasted movements. No hesitation. A brutal backhand caught Carter's shoulder. His body lifted off the ground. He crashed against the stone, hard. The breath ripped from his lungs. Razek loomed, twin plasma blades igniting from his forearms. "This is your end, human." Carter coughed, shifting onto one knee. His fingers curled around the detonator switch in his jacket pocket. "Maybe," he said, voice tight. He flicked the switch. The fortress shook violently as charges detonated across the structure. Carter had planted them hours ago. Razek snarled off balance. The zealots reeled, their systems glitching from the shockwave. Carter surged forward, one shot straight into the warlord's exposed throat. Razek staggered, choked. Blood, black and thick, spilled onto the floor. The throne room collapsed in. Fire and smoke. Carter was already gone. The fortress burned. Fire climbed the shattered walls, licking at the storm-racked sky. The zealots were broken, their cybernetic bodies twitching in death, sparks fizzling where flesh met machine. The warlord's throne lay in smoking ruins, a jagged mass of twisted metal and shattered stone, and Razek Vul was dead. Carter stood at the edge of the battlefield, breathing heavy, his ribs aching from the warlord's last blow. The detonations had done most of the work. The chaos, the distraction, the perfect moment to strike. But the kill was his. He tapped his wrist display, pulling up the bounty contract. The moment the system scanned Vul's corpse, the bounty updated. Thousand credits confirmed. The highest paid kill in the guild's history. Carter exhaled through his teeth, rolling his shoulders. It was done. His fingers hovered over the comms. Ready to send the confirmation signal. Ready to let the galaxy know the job was complete. But something made him pause. Silence. Not the kind of silence that came after a fight, where death settled like dust over the bodies. Something else. The fortress shouldn't have been quiet. Even in ruin, it should have been humming with power, backup systems kicking in. The Maw should have still been alive. And yet, nothing. No warning lights, no distant machinery groaning. To restart, just emptiness. Carter's grip tightened on his weapon. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of ozone and something else, something old, something watching. He turned, scanning the ruins, and that was when he saw it. The throne wasn't just a seat, it was a hatch, a hidden chamber beneath the ruins. Edges blackened from the explosion, but untouched inside. A slow, mechanical hiss filled the air as the hatch began to open. Carter's gut twisted. This wasn't over. Not yet. The hatch yawned open, expelling a low hiss of pressurized air. Carter's muscles tensed, every instinct sharpening. He leveled his weapon, gaze locked on the growing darkness beneath the ruined throne. The warlord was dead. The zealots were wiped out. The fortress was collapsing around him, but something else had been waiting. A deep, rhythmic pulse echoed from within the hidden chamber. Not a machine, not an alarm, a heartbeat. Carter took a slow step forward. The air shifted colder than before. He was trained to recognize threats before they revealed themselves, to feel the wrongness of a moment before it struck. And this was wrong. His boots met the edge of the hatch. The chamber below was vast, stretching deeper than any underground vault had a right to. Rows of containment pods lined the walls, humming softly, each one pulsing with an eerie golden glow. And inside them, Carter's pulse spiked. Humans, hundreds of them, suspended in stasis, locked behind alien glass. Their bodies, untouched by time, expressions frozen mid-dream, as if they had been taken straight from another life. His breath came slow, steady. This wasn't a warlord's vault. It was a prison. Carter moved closer, brushing his gloved fingers against the nearest pod's surface. The readings were ancient, older than the warlord, older than the guild itself. He swore under his breath. The Tarkayan hadn't just built their empire on conquest, they had built it on something else. His wrist display flickered, data rushing. In decrypting on instinct, the readings confirmed it. These weren't just prisoners, they were the first humans ever taken by the galactic empires. The ones erased from history, the ones humanity never knew they had lost. Carter's hands clenched. This was bigger than a bounty, bigger than 1 million credits, bigger than him. A static crackle filled his earpiece. Then, a voice. Faint, distant, ancient. You were never meant to find us. Carter stepped back, gun raised. The pods began to open, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't know what came next.